I never thought I'd see the day when I'd sit alone at my husband's funeral. The rain wouldn't stop that morning. It fell gently, as if the sky itself was mourning with me. I sat by his grave, holding my black umbrella, feeling the cold metal handle tremble in my hands. There were no children beside me, no family. The people I gave my life to were somewhere else, laughing, celebrating. And I was here, burying not just my husband, but a part of myself. When I returned home, the silence followed me inside. Every room whispered memories, our laughter, our arguments, the sound of his voice calling my name. And then, while cleaning his old drawer, I found the letters, written in his familiar handwriting. In those pages lived the truth I had refused to see for years. Maybe our family began breaking long before his heart did. Now, in this emptiness, I keep asking myself, did I fail as a mother? Or has the world simply forgotten what love truly means? This is my story, the story of a wife, a mother, a woman who lost everything but found strength in her silence. Because sometimes the deepest betrayals aren't made with words, but with absence. The funeral. The sky was the color of smoke that morning. Not bright, not dark, just that dull, endless gray that makes everything feel heavier than it already is. The rain had been falling since dawn, steady and unbothered, as if even the heavens couldn't bring themselves to stop crying. I remember clutching my black umbrella with trembling fingers, the chill of the metal handle biting into my skin. Robert's coffin lay at the center of the churchyard, a polished wooden box that seemed too still, too quiet for a man who used to fill every room with warmth. His name, Robert James Holloway, gleamed faintly on the silver plate. Beneath it, the dates of his life, 1958, 2023. 65 years. A lifetime that suddenly felt like a breath, here one second, gone the next. The priest stood under a white canopy, murmuring words I'd heard at too many funerals before, but now they sounded distant, blurred by the sound of rain hitting umbrellas and soft sobs from the few who had come. I looked around. No familiar faces of my children, no sign of Evelyn's silver BMW, Daniel's black SUV, or Rachel's old blue hatchback. Just neighbors, a couple of Robert's old colleagues, and the quiet caretaker who had helped arrange the service. I told myself they were late. Maybe traffic, maybe weather. Anything but indifference. But as the minutes stretched, I stopped glancing at the road. The silence between prayers was answer enough. Robert always said I was too hopeful. "You'll wait for people who never meant to come, Maggie," he once told me, smiling sadly as he stirred his tea. "But that's your heart. You can't change it." And here I was, waiting again. The priest cleared his throat, his eyes flicking toward me, as if to ask permission to continue. I nodded. The ceremony went on. As he spoke about Robert's kindness and his life as a teacher, about how he had touched the lives of hundreds of students, I could almost hear Robert's soft laugh. He never liked being the center of attention. He used to joke that he wanted a quiet funeral, just you and the rain. I thought he was being dramatic, but maybe he knew. Maybe he'd seen this coming long before I did. When the choir sang, their voices thin against the wind, I closed my eyes. The words blurred together, and in that blur, I found myself drifting back to the last night we spent together. Flashback, the night before he died. It was quiet then, too. Not the silence of sadness, but that gentle kind of peace that comes when the world finally stops moving. Robert was in his favorite chair by the fireplace, reading the same book he'd been trying to finish for months. I was in the kitchen, preparing his medication. He called out, Maggie, do you ever wonder when it all slows down? I frowned. What do you mean? He closed the book and looked at me over his glasses. Life. It's like a race, isn't it? You run, and then one day you just stop running, and everything catches up to you. I smiled, brushing it off. You're just tired. You need rest. He chuckled softly. Maybe. But promise me something. What? If I go first, don't spend your time waiting for people who've already left, even if they're still alive. I didn't understand him then. I do now. That night, he fell asleep in his chair. I remember draping a blanket over him and kissing his forehead. He smiled in his sleep. That same gentle smile that always made me feel like the world was okay. By morning, he was gone. Peaceful, still holding that book. The priest's voice brought me back. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. I looked down at the coffin as the first handful of dirt hit the lid. The sound was small, but it echoed inside me like thunder. My throat burned, but I didn't cry. I'd done enough of that already. People approached one by one, soft condolences, empty words that evaporated into the rain. He was a good man. He'll be missed. You were lucky to have him. Lucky. Yes, I was. But luck runs out eventually. When they left, the churchyard emptied until it was just me, the priest, and the caretaker lowering the coffin into the ground. The priest offered to wait until my children arrived. I shook my head. No, start. He hesitated. Are you sure? I've been sure for years, I whispered. When it was done, I stayed long after everyone left. My umbrella had collapsed, my coat soaked through, but I didn't move. The rain on my skin felt honest, like it understood something words couldn't. I spoke softly to the ground. You were right, Robert. It's just me and the rain. Reflection. The children who didn't come. I tried not to think about them, but how could I not? Every mother does. Evelyn, my eldest, the one who was born with her father's patience but lost it somewhere in boardrooms and deadlines. She'd called 2 nights before, her voice flat. Mom, I'll be there. Just text me the location again. Daniel, my son, my bright, restless boy, who once followed Robert everywhere. He'd been streaming live the last few months, building an audience online. Mom, I'll come if I can, but it's hard to reschedule events, you know, sponsors and all. Rachel, my youngest, didn't even answer. She texted me later, a simple, love you, Mom, tell Dad I'm sorry. Tell Dad? How do you tell a dead man anything? For years, I tried to hold our family together. Dinners on Sundays, calls every week, birthdays remembered, even when they forgot mine. But slowly, they drifted away, one excuse at a time. Robert saw it first. He'd sigh after each missed visit, each unanswered message. We raised them for the world, Maggie, he'd say. We just didn't realize the world would take them this far. I used to defend them. They're busy, Robert. Life's different now. He'd nod, that quiet sadness in his eyes. Then I hope life keeps them company when we're gone. Now, standing by his grave, I wondered if life had kept them company, or if they were just too afraid to face what death reminded them of. I didn't blame them, not entirely. I knew what fear does. When you lose someone you love, it's not just grief that hurts, it's guilt. Maybe that's why they stayed away. Guilt is easier to ignore at a party than at a grave. The rain keeps falling. The rain had soaked through the ground, turning the dirt into dark, sticky clay. The caretaker gave me a sympathetic look. Ma'am, you should go home before the storm gets worse. I nodded, but didn't move. I traced the engraved letters on the temporary headstone with my fingers. Robert James Holloway. You hated your middle name, I whispered. Said it sounded too serious for someone who laughed at his own jokes. I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hurts more than crying. Behind me, the wind rustled the trees. The world kept moving, as if it hadn't just lost someone irreplaceable. That's what death does. It stops one life, but everything else keeps walking. It's cruel that way. When I finally turned to leave, the cemetery was empty. My car sat alone by the gate, cold and waiting. As I walked, I looked back one last time. The rain blurred my vision until the grave was just a shadow through the mist. Back home. The house was too quiet when I walked in. Not the kind of quiet you rest in, the kind that hums with emptiness. His slippers were still by the fireplace, his reading glasses still on the armrest, the cup he used every night still on the table, faint stain of tea at the bottom. I hung my coat and stood there for a while, listening for sounds that would never come. His cough, his laugh, the soft creak of the chair when he stood up. I sat down where he used to sit and whispered, "I thought they'd come, Robert. I really did." Silence answered. The clock ticked. The wind pressed against the window. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. Not loud, just enough to remind me that the storm wasn't over. I looked at the framed photo on the mantel, the one of all 5 of us, taken years ago on a summer trip. Robert had his arm around me, the kids smiling, their faces glowing with a happiness that seemed eternal at the time. Now, it looked like a lie. A mother's guilt. I sat there for hours, replaying every moment I could remember. The laughter, the arguments, the growing silence. I wondered if I'd done something wrong. Maybe I'd loved them too much, made life too easy for them. Maybe they never learned what it meant to show up for someone because they always assumed I would. I'd given them everything I could, my time, my sleep, my patience, and in the end, they couldn't give one afternoon to say goodbye to the man who gave them life. I tried not to hate them for it, but hate has a way of disguising itself as hurt. The rain had followed me home. It trailed behind the car, streaking the windows like pale veins, and by the time I reached our street, the sky had already turned to dusk. The house looked smaller from the outside, as though it had shrunk without him, its windows dark, its porch light flickering like a tired eye refusing to close. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat there for a while, hands still gripping the steering wheel. The silence inside the car was heavier than the one in the graveyard. There, I'd at least had the sound of rain, the soft murmur of strangers. Here, it was only the echo of my own breathing. Finally, I stepped out. The driveway smelled of wet leaves and cold cement. Robert's tools still hung on the wall of the garage, untouched since spring. His hammer, his wrench, the old red toolbox he never let me clean. I brushed my hand across it. It was cold, like everything else. Inside, the air was stale, trapped in the corners like forgotten memories. I turned on the lights, one by one, and each click of the switch made the emptiness louder. The living room greeted me like a ghost. The same beige sofa, the same coffee table, the same framed photographs that once made the house feel alive. Only now, the laughter inside those frames felt foreign, as if it belonged to another family altogether. I walked toward the fireplace, where his chair still sat, angled just so toward the window. His reading glasses rested on the armrest, exactly where I'd left them. The book he'd been reading, The Old Man in the Sea, lay open, page 91. A bookmark I'd made years ago peeked out, a dried clover pressed between 2 pieces of tape. I picked it up and traced his handwriting on the page margin, his tiny notes, always in pencil. "Courage isn't loud," one said. "It's just quiet persistence." I closed the book and held it against my chest. It was strange how objects could still breathe when people couldn't. The first phone call. The phone rang just as I walked into the kitchen. Its sharp digital sound cut through the silence. I didn't rush to answer. Part of me wanted to let it ring until it stopped, but habit won. I wiped my hands on my coat and picked it up. "Mom?" Evelyn's voice, controlled, businesslike. "Evelyn," I said softly. I just saw the time. I'm sorry I couldn't make it. Things got really busy at work today. The client presentation ran late, and I closed my eyes. "You missed your father's funeral." There was a pause. "I know. I'm sorry. I really am." Her words sounded like they'd been practiced, like something she'd said before. "You could have called," I said. "I thought I'd make it. I didn't want to bother you with excuses." "It wouldn't have been a bother, Evelyn. It would have been something." Silence again. Just the faint hum of her office air conditioning on the other end. "I'll come visit soon," she said. "Maybe next weekend." I almost asked her what she meant by soon, but I didn't. We both knew how those weekends turned into months. "Okay," I whispered. "Drive safe." She hung up first. Echoes of the past. After the call, I poured myself a cup of tea, but it went cold before I could drink it. My mind drifted through the years, through the sounds of this house when it was full. Robert used to hum in the mornings, always off-key, but happy. Evelyn would run down the stairs, late for school, complaining about her hair. Daniel would fight for the bathroom, and Rachel would hide under the table, giggling as if she were invisible. That noise, that chaotic, loving noise, was gone now. The kitchen clock ticked like a heartbeat trying too hard to fill the void. I ran my hand along the dining table, tracing invisible shapes in the dust. Each mark reminded me of a dinner conversation, a spilled drink, a forgotten joke. The chair at the end of the table was Robert's. It still leaned back slightly. He had that habit, tilting it while reading the newspaper. I told him hundreds of times he'd fall one day. He never did. I pulled out that same chair and sat down. It creaked the same way it always did, and for a moment I could almost believe he was still across from me, smiling through the morning paper. "Why do you always sit in that chair?" he'd once asked. "Because I like facing you," I'd said. Now I faced an empty seat. Daniel's excuse. It was nearly 10 when the phone rang again. This time, Daniel. "Hey, Mom." His voice was light, too light. "Daniel," I said, trying to sound steady. "Look, I know today was important. I couldn't get out of something. It was a live thing. Thousands of people were watching. I wanted to honor Dad, but—" I interrupted softly. "Honor him how?" I asked softly. "By not showing up?" He leant quiet. I just thought he wouldn't want me to throw away my career over one day," I finished for him. "It was one day, Daniel. One day he waited for you." He sighed. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under, Mom." I wanted to scream. Pressure? My husband was in the ground, and my son was talking about algorithms and views. But instead, I said nothing. I'd learned that silence hurts more than words ever could. "I'll make it up to you," he said quickly. "We'll come over for dinner soon, all of us." "Soon," I echoed. When the line went dead, I felt something inside me settle. Not anger, not disappointment, just a hollow acceptance. This was the world now. People love you in text messages and remember you between meetings. The quiet hours. By midnight, the house had grown colder. The rain had stopped, but the quiet it left behind was worse. I walked down the hallway toward our bedroom. My steps sounded foreign, the echo of a stranger walking through someone else's memories. The bed was made, untouched since the morning Robert died. His side of the mattress still held the faint outline of his body, like a shadow pressed into fabric. I sat on his side. The scent of his cologne lingered faintly, wood, citrus, something warm. It hit me like a wave. I buried my face in his pillow and whispered, "I don't know how to do this, Robert, not without you." I didn't expect an answer, but for a second the house creaked, that familiar pop in the ceiling we used to joke about. I smiled through my tears. "Still listening, aren't you?" Rachel's message. I woke up sometime near dawn to the buzz of my phone. A text. "Rachel. Sorry I didn't come, Mom. I couldn't handle seeing him like that. I'll visit soon." No punctuation, no emotion, just the kind of message you send when you want to feel like you've done the bare minimum. I stared at it for a long time, then turned the phone face down. I wanted to be angry, but all I felt was tired. The letter. That morning, I made coffee and opened the curtains. The storm had passed, leaving streaks of sunlight crawling across the wet glass. The house looked different in the light, not warmer, just more exposed. Every corner, every object seemed to carry a story that refused to fade. When I reached for the sugar jar, I noticed something odd. Beneath it, tucked between two folded placemats, was an envelope. Old, yellowed at the edges, sealed with Robert's handwriting scrawled across the front. For Maggie, only when I'm gone. My breath caught. I traced the letters with my thumb. The ink had smudged slightly, probably from his hands. It wasn't dated, but I knew that handwriting anywhere. I carried it to the table and sat down. For a while, I just stared at it. My heart raced like I was about to open the past itself. Finally, I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice, written front and back. His handwriting was neat, steady, like the way he always wrote lists for groceries or birthdays. I began to read. My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, it means I finally kept my promise to go before you. I know you'll want to argue about that, but I always told you I'd never let you go first. You'd hate the silence too much. If I could have one morning more, I'd spend it watching you water the roses. You always thought you looked silly in that old sun hat, but I never told you how beautiful you were then, because you would blush and call me sentimental. You're probably sitting in that chair right now, tea gone cold, trying to stay strong. Don't. Cry if you must. The rain outside is the world's way of crying with you. There's something I never told you, not because I wanted to hide it, but because I wanted to find it yourself. In the study, behind the second drawer of my desk, there's another letter, for you. It's part of something I started a long time ago. It's not goodbye, Maggie. It's just me talking to you a little longer. Always yours, Robert. I pressed the letter against my heart and sobbed. Not because it hurt, but because it felt like he'd found a way to stay. When I finally calmed down, I looked toward the hallway that led to his study. The door was slightly open, the same way he always left it. And for the first time since he died, I felt something other than grief. I felt purpose. I stood up, still holding the letter, and whispered, "Okay, Robert, I'll find it." Part 3. The Letters. The morning after I found the first letter, sunlight broke through the curtains for the first time in days. It painted golden lines across the floor, cutting through the stillness that had settled over the house. Dust floated lazily in the beams, turning the air itself into something almost visible, like ghosts finally finding form. I sat at the kitchen table with the letter spread out before me. I had read it so many times that I could recite every word. Behind the second drawer of my desk, there's another letter. The study had always been Robert's place, quiet, orderly, filled with the scent of paper and old ink. I hadn't stepped inside since the morning the paramedics carried him out. Part of me had avoided it on purpose. It felt sacred, untouched, like stepping inside would erase what little of him still lingered. But now his words had called me back. The study. I pushed open the door. The hinges groaned, tired from disuse. The room was just as he'd left it. Stacks of books, a faded rug, the window slightly cracked to let in air. His desk sat in the corner beneath a shelf of old notebooks. A single pen lay across the blotter, uncapped, as if he'd meant to return any second. I ran my fingers across the desk's surface. It was smooth, worn down in the places where his hands had rested for years. When I pulled open the first drawer, I found nothing unusual. Bills, stationery, a half-used notebook. But the second drawer stuck halfway, jammed as though something was blocking it. My hands trembled as I tugged harder. It creaked open, revealing a hidden compartment at the back, a narrow wooden panel slightly loose on one side. Behind it, there were envelopes. 8 of them. each one labeled carefully in Robert's neat handwriting. Letter 1 to Maggie. Letter 2 to Evelyn. Letter 3 to Daniel. Letter 4 to Rachel. Letter 5 to my family. Letter 6 to myself. Letter 7 to the future. Letter 8 to the one who listens. I sat back, heart racing. His handwriting was steady, deliberate, the kind of calm that comes when a person has already made peace with something inevitable. I picked up the first one. To Maggie. Letter 1. To Maggie. My dearest. If you found these, you've already read the first note. I meant every word of it. You've been my strength through every storm. But there's something I need you to know, not to hurt you, but to unburden what I couldn't say aloud. I started writing these letters months ago when the doctor told me how little time I had. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to stop living before I did. I saw the distance growing in our family, Maggie. You saw it too, didn't you? The laughter at dinner fading into the glow of phone screens, the visits turning into video calls, the hugs replaced by heart emojis. I kept telling myself it was just the times, that the world had changed. But it wasn't the world, it was us. We stopped reaching first. Maybe I should have fought harder. Maybe I should have told them what I was facing. But pride kept me quiet, and love kept me pretending. I didn't want pity, I wanted memory. And that's what these letters are, memories for you to hold when I'm gone. Always yours, Robert. My tears fell onto the page, smudging the ink where his name ended. The idea that he'd faced his last months in silence, protecting me from grief I could have shared, broke something inside me. I pressed the letter against my lips. You fool, I whispered, you stubborn, beautiful fool. I reached for the second envelope. Letter 2, to Evelyn. My sweet Evelyn, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I hope you came home for your mother, even if it's too late for me. You were always chasing something, grades, promotions, recognition. I admired it, even envied it. You got your drive from me, but your heart from your mother. The problem is, somewhere along the way, you learned to silence your heart because the world told you success mattered more. I remember when you were 7, you told me you wanted to build homes for people who didn't have any. You even made blueprints out of cereal boxes. Somewhere in those skyscrapers you design now, I hope there's still that little girl, the one who built dreams for others, not just for herself. Don't let the world make you hard, Evelyn, and don't let guilt stop you from loving your mother the way you used to. She doesn't need apologies, she just needs you to show up. Your father, Robert. When I finished reading, I didn't even realize I dialed Evelyn's number. She didn't pick up. I left the letter on the table beside her father's photo. Flashback, the beginning of the drift. I remember the first time Robert mentioned it, the distance growing between us and the kids. It was a Sunday lunch 3 years ago. Evelyn had canceled last minute. Daniel came late, halfway through dessert, already glued to his phone. Rachel spent most of the meal taking pictures of her plate. After they left, Robert sat back, watching the door close behind them. They don't look at us anymore when they talk, he said quietly. They're busy, I'd replied automatically. It's just how things are now. He shook his head. No, Maggie, it's not how things are. It's how we let them be. I'd laughed it off, not wanting to admit he was right, because admitting it meant accepting that love alone wasn't enough to keep a family together. Letter 3, to Daniel. My boy, you were born on a Thursday. It was raining. I remember holding you in my arms, terrified and amazed, wondering how someone so small could already mean so much. You were always chasing something, faster, louder, brighter. I used to think it was just youth, but maybe it was fear. Fear of being ordinary. You wanted to matter to the world. What you didn't realize was that you already did. To me, to your mother. I watched your videos sometimes, even when you didn't know. You had my laugh, the same silly way of talking with your hands. I wanted to call you and tell you how proud I was, but pride and distance, they're dangerous twins. Don't measure your worth by followers or applause, Daniel. The loudest rooms are often the emptiest. Call your mother. Sit with her. She won't ask for it, but she needs it. Love, Dad. When I finished that one, I laughed, an odd, broken sound that surprised me. Because even after death, Robert was still doing what he'd always done, finding gentle ways to teach lessons I could never deliver without tears. Letter 4, to Rachel. My little dreamer. You were the wild one, the one who sang to yourself and drew on the walls when no one was looking. You reminded me that joy didn't need permission. But I also saw how you began to hide that joy as you grew. The world told you to be quieter, smaller, less strange. Don't listen to it, Rachel. Your light was never meant to blend in. If you ever doubt yourself, look at your mother. She carried that same stubborn fire all her life. And if the day ever comes when you feel lost, go to the attic. There's a box there with your name on it. Inside, you'll find every drawing you ever made. I kept them all. Love always, Dad. The attic. I looked toward the ceiling, heart fluttering with a strange mix of pain and anticipation. I hadn't been up there in years. But first, I needed to read the next letter. Letter 5, to my family. If by some miracle you're all together while reading this, then maybe I've done something right. Families don't fall apart all at once. They crumble quietly. Missed calls, forgotten birthdays, promises postponed until next week. You'll think you have time. You never do. I hope these words bring you back to each other. Even if I'm gone, the table's still here. The chairs still wait. Don't let them stay empty. Robert. I set it down slowly. The paper trembled in my hands. For years, I had been trying to glue together a family that had already stopped believing in glue. And Robert, dying quietly, writing alone, had still been fighting for us in the only way he could, with words. Letter 6, to myself. This one was shorter, written in smaller handwriting, as if he hadn't intended anyone else to read it. If I'm reading this, or if Maggie is, then I finally run out of time. I just hope she forgives me for keeping the truth from her. She deserves the truth, but I wanted to spare her pain. Maybe that was selfish. The doctor said months. It's been almost a year now. Maybe I lasted longer because I couldn't bear to leave her alone. If there's any mercy in this world, let her find peace faster than I did. I folded it back carefully. That one wasn't meant for me, but reading it felt like holding his heartbeat one last time. Letter 7, to the future. If someone else finds these letters years from now, I hope they understand one thing. Love isn't in the grand gestures. It's in the showing up, in being there when it matters. Technology will change, the world will spin faster, but people will always crave the same. To be seen, to be remembered, to be loved. Letter 8, to the one who listens. This one was different. The handwriting was uneven, shakier. To whoever listens, maybe it's... The house always looked smaller in my memories, though perhaps it wasn't the walls that had shrunk. It was the laughter that had gone silent. When I close my eyes, I still see the golden afternoons of our youth. Robert sitting at the kitchen table, his glasses slipping down his nose, scribbling on his old notepad. The children racing around the living room, their footsteps a constant drumbeat of life. And me, half exhausted but smiling, stirring a pot on the stove while humming a tune I don't remember anymore. Those were our golden years, the ones we took for granted, thinking they'd last forever. It's strange the way happiness fades, not with a bang, but with small, invisible cracks. At first, it was just exhaustion. Robert working longer hours at the school, grading papers until midnight. Me trying to keep up with 3 growing children, each more restless than the last. Evelyn was the eldest, always sharp, always eager to prove herself. Daniel, our middle child, quiet but stubborn. And Rachel, the youngest, forever lost in her own little world of dolls and drawings. We thought we were a perfect family. Maybe we were, for a time. But life has its way of wearing people down quietly. It began with silence. Robert would come home and forget to ask about my day. I would serve dinner, but he'd eat absent-mindedly, his mind still buried in lesson plans. The children would argue at the table, Evelyn demanding a new dress, Daniel complaining about school, Rachel sulking because no one noticed her drawing. I'd try to calm everyone, but slowly, dinner stopped feeling like togetherness and started feeling like a duty. Maybe we just need a vacation, I had suggested once, smiling through the tension. Robert had looked up and smiled weakly. A vacation won't fix exhaustion, Maggie. It was the first time he called it that, exhaustion. The years passed faster than we realized. Evelyn went to college, then got too busy to call. Daniel became moody, drifting between jobs, never satisfied. Rachel grew quiet, withdrawn. Robert grew older, his hair turning silver before my eyes. He had a cough that wouldn't go away. I begged him to see a doctor, but he waved it off. "It's just the weather," he said, again and again. Until one night, he couldn't finish his sentence without stopping to breathe. That was when the fear began. The kind that doesn't scream, just whispers in the dark. The diagnosis came in spring. Heart condition, advanced, manageable, they said, if he took it easy. But Robert never took it easy. Teaching wasn't a job to him, it was his identity. I remember that day vividly. The doctor's words hung in the air, heavy as stone. Robert held my hand but wouldn't meet my eyes. "We'll be fine," he said as we walked out. "You'll see. I just need to slow down a little." He didn't slow down. He worked until his hands shook and his voice cracked in front of his students. He came home exhausted, sometimes collapsing into bed without eating. I'd watch him sleep and trace the lines on his face, the deep ones around his eyes, the marks of a man who'd carried too much responsibility for too long. The fights began around that time, too. Not loud ones, but small, cutting ones. "Robert, you need to rest." "I'll rest when I'm done grading." "You'll kill yourself at this rate." "And what do you want me to do, Maggie? Sit around waiting for it?" He never realized that I wasn't afraid of his death as much as I was his distance. The children were too busy to notice. Evelyn was in another city. Daniel had moved out. And Rachel, sweet Rachel, was always in her room with headphones on, pretending not to hear. Some nights, Robert would sit alone in the garden, staring at the roses he planted years ago. I would watch him through the kitchen window, the way his shoulders drooped under the weight of his own thoughts. I wanted to go to him, to sit beside him, to tell him he wasn't alone. But sometimes, love feels like an invisible wall. Both of you on opposite sides, unable to find the door. The breaking point came one winter night. He had just come home from school, soaked from the rain. His cough was worse. I followed him to the living room, holding his towel. "Robert, please, you need to take a few days off." "I can't. The new term starts next week." "You can't even climb the stairs without losing your breath." "Don't start this again, Maggie." "I'm not starting anything. I'm trying to keep you alive." He turned to me then, eyes tired, voice trembling, not with anger, but sorrow. "I'm already dying, Maggie," he whispered. "I just want to die doing something that matters." I didn't have a reply. My tears came silently, like rain on glass. He walked past me, leaving the towel on the table. That was the night I realized love doesn't always mean understanding. It often means watching someone destroy themselves and not being able to stop them. A few weeks later, he collapsed in his classroom. I remember the phone call. I was folding laundry when it rang. His colleague's voice was trembling. "Mrs. Whitaker, it's Robert. You should come to the hospital." The drive felt endless. Every red light felt cruelty. When I arrived, he was awake but pale, hooked to machines. He smiled when he saw me, the same tired smile I'd fallen in love with decades ago. "I told you not to worry so much," he said softly. And I broke, right there, in front of the doctors and nurses. He stayed in the hospital for a few days. The children promised to visit, but they didn't. Evelyn said she had an important meeting. Daniel sent a message, "Tell Dad I'll come next weekend." Rachel said hospitals made her anxious. Robert pretended not to mind. "They're just busy," he said, his hand cold in mine. But I saw it, the flicker of hurt behind his eyes. That night, as I sat by his bed, he took my hand. "Maggie," he whispered, "if I don't make it, promise me one thing." "Don't say that." "Promise me you'll forgive them, no matter what." I wanted to argue, to tell him that forgiveness isn't something you can promise, it's something you have to earn. But I nodded anyway, because I couldn't bear to see him die with regret. He came home a week later. For a while, things looked better. He smiled more, ate better, even tended the garden again. I let myself believe he'd recover. Until one morning, I found him sitting on the porch, his cup of tea untouched, his eyes far away. "I had a dream last night," he said. "About what?" "About you. You were sitting in the garden after the rain, talking to the roses, and I wasn't there." I forced a smile. "That's just a silly dream." He looked at me then, really looked, and said quietly, "No dream is silly when it feels like goodbye." I laughed it off at the time, but that memory haunts me now. 2 weeks later, he was gone. A heart attack in his sleep. Peaceful, they said. I found him at dawn, the light creeping across his face, as if heaven itself had come to fetch him. His glasses lay on the nightstand, his hand resting gently on his chest, as though he'd known. And in that moment, the house went silent forever. It's strange what you remember after death. Not the words, but the small things. The sound of his pen scratching paper, the smell of his aftershave, the way he always folded the newspaper just so. Those memories stay. They breathe when you can't. The children came briefly for the arrangements. They stood in the living room, awkward, detached. Evelyn asked practical questions about the will. Daniel avoided eye contact. Rachel cried for 5 minutes, then left to take a call outside. They all left before the night ended. I stayed. That's when I noticed the drawer half open in Robert's study, the one I hadn't touched in months. Inside were letters, tied with a red ribbon, each envelope addressed in his handwriting. 1 for me, 3 for the children. And that's when I knew he had been preparing for this, preparing for goodbye. Morning light had a way of mocking me after Robert's death. It poured through the curtains like an uninvited guest, bright, relentless, and indifferent to grief. I would wake to the smell of nothing, the silence of a house that had forgotten laughter. The roses outside bloomed as if they hadn't noticed the man who planted them was gone. The day after the funeral, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the letters he'd left behind. 4 envelopes tied with a red ribbon. His handwriting, neat but trembling, was the same as it had been on our wedding day invitations decades ago. The top one had my name on it. The others bore the names of our children, Evelyn, Daniel, and Rachel. For hours, I just stared at them. I couldn't bring myself to open mine yet. I didn't want Robert's words to end. When I finally did, it was dusk. The house glowed in that strange orange light that comes before nightfall. My hands shook as I untied the ribbon and unfolded his letter. My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, I'm no longer there to tell you how much I loved you. But I need you to know, love doesn't die. It just changes its address. You'll find me in the garden, in the scent of rain, in the silence between words. I wrote letters for the children, too. I don't know if they'll ever read them, but maybe you can help them remember who they were before the world made them too busy to feel. Don't spend your days mourning me. Live. Even if it's quiet, even if it's lonely. You were the best part of every day I ever had. Robert. I pressed the paper to my chest and wept until the ink blurred. For hours, I sat there in the stillness, thinking of the man who never stopped believing in me, even when I'd stopped believing in myself. Then I looked at the other letters. 3 small chances to heal what was left of our family. I decided to deliver them myself. Evelyn. My eldest daughter lived 2 hours away in the city. Her world was made of schedules and suits, deadlines and dinner reservations. She had become everything Robert once hoped for and everything I feared she'd lose herself to. When I called her, she sounded distracted. "Mom, can this wait? I'm about to head into a meeting." "It's important, Evelyn. It's about your father." A pause. "I already went to the funeral. What else is there to say?" I swallowed hard. "He left you a letter." Another pause. This one longer. "A letter?" "Yes. He wrote it before it happened." I could almost hear her soft sigh through the line. "Okay, I'll stop by sometime this week." But she didn't. So 3 days later, I took the bus to her office building, a tall glass tower that felt colder than any winter I'd ever known. She met me in the lobby, dressed in a navy suit, heels clicking on the marble floor. She looked beautiful, successful, and utterly exhausted. "Mom, you shouldn't have come all this way." "I just wanted to give you this," I said, holding out the letter. "He wanted you to have it." She looked at it like it was something fragile, dangerous even. Then she slipped it into her bag without opening it. "I'll read it later," she said quickly. "I promise." But I saw her eyes flicker toward her phone when it buzzed in her hand. "You should go home, Mom. You'll catch a cold on the bus back." She kissed my cheek, a quick, polite gesture, and disappeared through the glass doors. And that was it. Outside, I stood by the bus stop, watching people rush past me, each trapped in their own little storms. I wanted to shout after her, to tell her that time doesn't wait, that someday she'd wish she'd read that letter sooner. But grief teaches silence. Daniel. Daniel had always been the quiet one. As a boy, he'd build things, little wooden planes, model ships. Robert used to sit with him for hours in the garage, teaching him how to use a screwdriver properly. But something changed when he grew older. He became distant, restless. His jobs came and went, relationships never lasted, and calls home grew fewer each year. When I called him after visiting Evelyn, his tone was flat. "Mom, I'm fine, really. I'm handling things in my own way." "I know, but he wrote you something. He wanted you to read it." He sighed. "Letters won't bring him back." "No, but they might bring you back." He didn't reply. I sent the letter by post since he refused to meet. A week passed, then 2. When he finally called, his voice was softer. "I read it," he said. For a moment, I couldn't speak. "And?" He was quiet. Then he said he was proud of me, even though I never gave him a reason to be. Tears filled my eyes. "He always was, Daniel." He exhaled. "I don't know how to feel, Mom. It's easier to be angry than sad, you know." "Yes," I whispered. "I know." He didn't say goodbye before hanging up. But that night, for the first time in years, he sent me a photo of a small wooden plane sitting on his workbench. The caption read, "Started something new today." It was enough. Rachel. My youngest was always my dreamer. She drew on walls, sang in the shower, and cried when her goldfish died. But adulthood had turned her softness into armor. She lived in a studio apartment filled with canvases she never sold, claiming art doesn't need validation. I visited her unannounced. Her door opened just a crack. "Mom, why didn't you call first?" "I needed to see you. Your father left you a letter." She frowned, her eyes shadowed by fatigue. "Another guilt trip from the grave?" "No, darling. He never wrote to guilt anyone." She crossed her arms. "You don't understand. He was always disappointed in me. You both were." Her voice trembled. She wasn't angry, she was hurt. I handed her the envelope anyway. "Please." She hesitated, then took it. When I turned to leave, she said quietly, "Do you still talk to him?" I smiled faintly. "Every day." That night, she called me. Her voice was breaking. "Mom, he wrote that he used to sneak into my room when I was asleep to look at my paintings. He said he never stopped believing in me." I felt my throat tighten. "He never did." She sniffled. "I just wish I'd known that sooner." We stayed on the phone for hours, talking about him, about the way he used to dance with her in the living room, about the day he built her first easel. By the end of the call, she whispered, "Thank you for bringing me the letter." And for the first time in years, she called me Mom instead of Maggie. The reflection. Weeks passed. The letters had been delivered, the words read or ignored. And still, I felt hollow. I'd done what he asked, but the silence in the house only grew heavier. The children still rarely called. One evening, as I sat by the window, I found myself whispering, "Was I a bad mother?" The question echoed in the empty room. I remembered all the nights I stayed up sewing costumes for school plays, all the mornings I packed lunches and forgot my own breakfast. I remembered the arguments, the slammed doors, the tears. Motherhood, I realized, isn't a guarantee of love returned. It's an act of faith. You give and give, hoping someday they'll understand. Maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. But Robert's words stayed with me. Love doesn't die, it just changes its address. So I decided to visit the garden. The roses were blooming brighter than ever. The air smelled of rain and memory. I knelt beside them and whispered, "I did what you asked, Robert. I gave them your words." The wind stirred the petals gently, as if answering. And in that moment, for the first time in months, I felt peace. Not because I had healed, but because I had finally accepted that healing was slow, quiet work. The kind Robert would have understood. The days had started blending together. Morning looked the same as evening, and evening bled quietly into night. Sometimes I'd sit by the kitchen window, counting how many cars passed by before the street went empty again. The world outside moved on, fast, alive, unbothered. I was the only one who hadn't. Robert's letters had stirred something in the children, but their lives had swallowed them back up. Evelyn sent flowers once a month now, always white lilies with a typed card that said, "Thinking of you." Daniel called occasionally, his voice quieter each time. Rachel came home twice, both visits short and uneasy. They were trying, I knew that, but sometimes trying still feels like distance. And I had grown used to talking to ghosts. The house remained mostly quiet, except for the creaking of floorboards and the faint ticking of the old grandfather clock Robert once repaired himself. I spent most of my mornings watering his roses, trimming the dead stems, whispering to the garden as though it could whisper back. Then, one Tuesday afternoon in early autumn, the doorbell rang. At first, I thought it was Rachel. She was the only one who ever dropped by unannounced. But when I opened the door, a tall young man stood on the porch, perhaps in his 30s, holding a worn leather satchel and a nervous smile. "Mrs. Whitaker?" he asked softly. "Yes," I said, studying his face. "Do I know you?" He smiled. "Probably not anymore. I was one of Robert's students. My name's Samuel." Something in his eyes, earnest, kind, reminded me of my husband immediately. I stepped aside. "Please, come in." The living room hadn't changed much since Robert's passing. His chair still sat by the window, the same throw blanket folded neatly on the armrest. I caught Samuel's eyes lingering there. "I can't believe it's been almost 5 years since I last saw him," he murmured. "He was the best teacher I ever had." "You knew him well?" I asked, gesturing for him to sit. He hesitated, then smiled faintly. "As well as any student could. He taught us literature, but really, he taught us how to think, how to see beauty in small things." I felt warmth rise in my chest. "That sounds like him." Samuel looked around the room, as though expecting Robert to appear at any moment. "I heard about his passing through the alumni board. I wanted to come sooner, but life got busy." I nodded gently. It always does. We sat with tea between us, sunlight drifting across the rug. He told me stories about Robert's classes, how he would throw chalk at the wall to get everyone's attention, how he once recited Shakespeare from memory because the power had gone out. "He said something once that stuck with me," Samuel said quietly. He told us, "Don't chase success, chase meaning. Success will follow if it's meant to." I smiled. That sounds exactly like something he'd say. "He changed my life," Samuel continued. "When I was 18, I was failing every subject. My parents were divorcing. I didn't care about anything. Mr. Whitaker was the first person who told me I wasn't stupid, that I just hadn't found what I loved yet. He stayed after class one day and said, 'Samuel, don't measure yourself by grades. Measure yourself by effort.'" He laughed softly. I still think about that. I felt my throat tighten. "He said the same to our children once. I don't think they ever believed him." Samuel's eyes softened. "That's the thing about wisdom. Sometimes it skips a generation before it sinks in." For the first time in months, I found myself laughing. It felt foreign, like using a muscle I'd forgotten existed. Samuel spent the afternoon helping me tidy the garden. He knelt beside the rose bushes Robert had planted decades ago, admiring how the roots had thickened over time. "Did he name them?" he asked. "All of them," I said, smiling. "The red ones he called truth, the white ones peace, and the yellow ones forgiveness. He used to say a garden should mirror the soul." Samuel brushed the soil from his hands. "Then his soul must have been something beautiful." I turned to look at the roses, alive, stubborn, blooming through the change of seasons, and for a moment I saw Robert kneeling there beside him. Same hands, same gentleness. When evening came, Samuel insisted on cooking dinner. "You fed students your whole life, Mrs. Whitaker. It's time someone returned the favor." So I let him. He cooked pasta, simple but warm, and we ate in the quiet dining room that hadn't hosted laughter in years. Between bites, he told me about his life, how he'd become a teacher too, though he taught art instead of literature. "I used to think teaching was a waste," he said, "but your husband made it feel sacred." That word, sacred, lingered in my mind long after. After dinner, Samuel stood to leave, but before he did, he placed something on the table, a framed photograph. It was old, slightly faded, a class picture from years ago. There was Robert in the center, smiling, with the younger Samuel standing beside him. "I found this in an old yearbook," Samuel said. "Thought you might like to have it." My hands trembled as I held it. Robert's smile was exactly as I remembered, calm, steady, full of quiet pride. "Thank you," I whispered. "You don't know what this means to me." He smiled. "I think I do." Then, just before he walked out the door, he turned back. "He used to talk about you, you know," he said. "He told us once that his greatest lesson in patience came from his wife, because she taught him that love doesn't always need to be loud to be real." I froze. My eyes filled instantly. "He said that?" Samuel nodded. He did, and he meant it. When the door closed behind him, the house didn't feel so empty anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept looking at the photograph Samuel had left. Robert's face seemed to glow under the lamplight, alive in a way I hadn't seen since before his illness. For the first time since his funeral, I didn't feel abandoned. He had left pieces of himself in the world, in every student he taught, in every heart he'd touched. His voice, his kindness, his lessons, they hadn't died with him. They'd simply found new homes. And maybe that was enough. In the days that followed, Samuel visited often, sometimes to help with the garden, sometimes just to talk. He'd bring pastries from a local bakery or books he thought Robert might have liked. Each time he came, the house seemed a little warmer. He never spoke about his own grief, but I could see it, a quiet understanding in his eyes, as if he too carried ghosts. One afternoon, as we pruned the roses, he said softly, "I think people like Robert never really leave. They just hand over the torch." "And who carries it next?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Maybe we all do, in small ways." I looked down at my hands, worn, trembling, scarred by years of work and worry. Maybe that was true. Maybe I carried him every day without realizing it. One morning, Samuel brought a box with him. "I found something," he said, setting it on the table. "It was in the school archives." Inside were stacks of old essays, Robert's handwriting notes covering the margins. "You can always be better," one read. "Never stop questioning the world," said another. And then, in one essay, under Samuel's name, a single line stood out in bold. "The heart remembers what the mind forgets." It was Robert's handwriting. Samuel smiled. "That's what I've been trying to live by." I traced the words with my fingertip, whispering, "So have I." Winter crept in slowly. The roses began to sleep under the frost. But I didn't feel the same emptiness I used to. I'd begun writing again, small notes to myself, reflections, sometimes even little letters to Robert. Samuel still visited, though less often. He was busy with his students now, preparing them for their exhibitions. Once, before leaving, he looked at me and said, "He'd be proud of you, you know." I laughed softly. "For what? For surviving?" "For living," he said simply. That night I stood in the garden, the air cold and sharp. Above me, the stars burned faintly, distant but alive. I whispered to the sky, "You were right, Robert. Love doesn't die. It just changes its address." And for the first time in a long while, I felt something blooming inside me. Not joy, not yet, but peace. A quiet, steady peace. Spring had returned to the valley, though it felt slower this year, hesitant, almost apologetic. The roses were beginning to wake under the soft light, and the air smelled faintly of wet soil and lilacs. I spent most mornings sitting on the porch, tea in hand, watching the garden stretch and breathe again. It had been 6 months since Samuel first knocked on my door. 6 months since I'd started to feel alive again. His visits had grown rare now, a letter here, a call there, but his presence lingered. The house no longer felt haunted. It felt remembered. But peace, I've learned, has a way of being temporary. That morning, the phone rang, and with it came the echo of a life I thought I'd already mourned. "Mom," Rachel's voice said through the static, "we're coming this weekend, all of us." I smiled. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I've missed you." A pause, too long to be kind. Then she added, "We need to talk. About the house." The tea in my hand went cold. "The house?" "Yes," she said briskly. "It's been years, Mom. It's too big for you, too much work. We think it's time to sell." I didn't answer. I couldn't. "We'll be there Saturday," she continued. "Don't worry, we'll handle everything." And before I could even breathe a reply, the line went dead. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The house creaked softly, as if listening. They want to sell it, I whispered into the empty room. This house, the one Robert built with his own hands, the one where all three of them took their first steps, where birthdays and Christmases and scraped knees had lived and breathed. I looked around at the faded wallpaper, the uneven floors, the photographs lining the mantel. Every crack in the wall told a story. Every corner whispered a memory. And now, my children, the same ones I'd raised under this roof, wanted to tear it all down in the name of convenience. I felt a bitterness rise in my throat, thick and sharp. Not anger, not yet, just a deep, aching disappointment. Saturday arrived too soon. I woke early, cleaned the house the way I used to before holidays, fresh linens, polished glassware, coffee brewing on the stove. It wasn't for them, it was for Robert. He would have wanted the house to look alive when they came. By noon, I saw their car pull into the driveway, a sleek black SUV that looked far too modern against the old white porch. Rachel stepped out first, sharp suit, phone in hand, her expression neutral. Then Evelyn, dressed elegantly, sunglasses still on despite the clouds. Daniel came last, hands in his pockets, eyes already somewhere else. For a moment they stood there, looking up at the house as though it were a stranger. And in that moment, I realized maybe it was. "Mom," Rachel called, forcing a smile as she approached. I hugged her, though her body was stiff, her perfume unfamiliar. "You all look so grown," I said, trying to sound cheerful. Daniel chuckled lightly. "It's been a while." Evelyn looked around. "The place hasn't changed much, has it?" I replied softly. "It's not supposed to." We went inside. The air filled quickly with polite conversation, the kind that fills silence but never warmth. I poured them tea. They didn't touch it. After a few minutes of small talk, Rachel finally spoke. "Mom," she began, sliding a folder from her bag, "we've been thinking about your living situation." "My living situation?" I repeated. "Yes," she said, opening the folder. "This house is, well, it's beautiful, but it's old. The maintenance costs, the utilities, it's not sustainable for you alone. We found a lovely retirement community nearby, very peaceful, with gardens and—" No. The word left my mouth before I even realized it. Evelyn frowned. "Mom, please, it's not about forcing you. It's about being practical." "Practical?" I looked at her. "Is that what this is now? Practicality?" Daniel spoke softly. "We just want what's best for you." I turned to him. "Do you even know what that is anymore?" He looked down, unable to answer. They exchanged uneasy glances. Rachel sighed, as though she'd rehearsed this 100 times. "Mom, we're not the enemy here. The market's strong right now. Selling the house could give you comfort, and us peace of mind." I stared at her. "Peace of mind?" "Yes," she said simply. "It's what Dad would have wanted." The room went still. I set my cup down slowly. "Don't you dare tell me what your father would have wanted." Her face froze. "Mom?" "No," I said, my voice rising for the first time in years. "You don't get to say his name like that. Not when you couldn't even come to his funeral." The air tightened. Evelyn shifted uncomfortably. Daniel looked away. "I was working overseas," Evelyn murmured. "And you, Rachel?" I asked. "What was your excuse? A party?" Rachel's jaw clenched. "It wasn't like that." "Oh, but it was." "You all had your reasons. You always do." My voice trembled, but I didn't stop. "You left me to bury him alone. You left me to clean up his things, to sort through 30 years of love and loss alone. And now you come back because the property value went up?" No one spoke. The only sound was the clock ticking, sharp, steady, merciless. Daniel finally broke the silence. Mom, it's not about the money. We just thought maybe it's time to let go. Let go? I repeated, almost laughing. Of what, Daniel? Memories? Roots? The only thing that still remembers who you were before the world taught you to forget. He winced. Evelyn whispered, "You're being unfair." "No, my dear," I said, softer now. "I'm finally being honest." I stood, my hands trembling, but not from weakness. "You think you're protecting me, but what you're really doing is erasing him, us. This house isn't a burden, it's a memory, and memories aren't meant to be sold." Rachel closed the folder. "You're emotional right now. Maybe we should—" "Yes," I said. "You should go." They stared at me, stunned. "Mom," Daniel began, but I shook my head. "I spent years waiting for you to come home," I said quietly. "Years defending your choices, forgiving your absences, pretending your indifference didn't hurt. I waited for calls that never came, birthdays you forgot, holidays you skipped. And still, I prayed you'd walk through that door and just see me. But you didn't come for me. You came for the house." Tears blurred Rachel's eyes. Evelyn bit her lip. Daniel looked like a boy again, guilty and small. "You've built walls around your hearts," I continued, "and you call them boundaries. You mistake neglect for independence. You've grown so afraid of love that you only show up when there's something to gain." I took a deep breath, the weight of years pressing against my chest. Well, there's nothing left to gain here except the truth. Silence swallowed the room. No one moved. Finally, Rachel whispered, "We didn't know you felt this way." I smiled sadly. "That's the problem, darling. You never asked." Evelyn reached forward, hesitant. "Mom, we're sorry." "I don't need sorry," I said softly. "I just need you to remember that family isn't paperwork and practicality. It's showing up. It's listening. It's love, even when it's inconvenient." Daniel wiped his eyes. "I know. But sometimes the right thing isn't the easy thing." They left that evening quietly. No more talk of selling, no promises of change. Just silence. But as the car disappeared down the road, I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt lighter. For the first time since Robert's death, I had spoken my pain aloud, raw, unfiltered, real. And in doing so, I felt him beside me again, as if his voice whispered through the wind. "You finally said what I never could." I stood in the doorway, watching the sunset burn gold over the garden. This house, our house, had survived storms, laughter, grief, and silence. And now it had witnessed truth. It would stand a little longer. The first drops of rain began before dawn. Soft, almost apologetic, a whisper against the old window panes, the kind of rain that seemed to know the weight of memories it would awaken. I sat by the window, a shawl wrapped around my shoulders, staring at the garden below. The roses Robert had planted were blooming again. Every spring, without fail. Even now, after everything, after him, after them, after me, they still rose, defiant and beautiful, as if untouched by time. 6 months had passed since the children's visit. They never came again. A few calls, once in a while, hurried, distant, full of promises that melted into silence. I no longer waited by the phone. The waiting had worn me thin. I filled my days with small things, feeding the stray cats that wandered by, dusting the bookshelves, watering the garden. I talked to Robert sometimes, not in words, but in quiet thoughts that lingered in the air between breaths. Sometimes I thought he answered. This morning, though, felt different. The air was colder, the rain heavier. The doctor had said last week that my heart was tired. Such a gentle word for something so cruel. He didn't say failing, though I saw it in his eyes. I told him I was fine. I've said that my whole life. I'm fine. It's what mothers say when no one listens. The kettle whistled faintly. I poured tea into my favorite cup, the one with the small chip on the rim. Robert had dropped it once, years ago, and apologized so many times I finally laughed. I'll never throw it away, I'd told him. It's perfect because it's been loved. He'd smiled then, kissed my forehead, and whispered, just like you. I traced the rim now with trembling fingers. You were wrong, Robert, I whispered. I wasn't perfect, but I loved you the best way I knew how. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly. The roses swayed in the wind. By noon, the rain had turned fierce. The sky was dark, almost bruised. I made my way to the garden, umbrella in hand, though the wind kept trying to steal it from me. The earth smelled alive, wet, rich, forgiving. The roses stood tall despite the storm, their petals glistening with raindrops like tears. Red, white, yellow, colors of love, purity, and farewell. Robert had planted them all. Each one had a story. The red ones for our anniversary. The white for the day Evelyn was born. The yellow because Daniel once said they looked like tiny suns. He used to kneel here for hours, tending to them as though they were children themselves. He'd talk to them softly, hum old songs, laugh when they bloomed unevenly. Roses listen, he'd say. You just have to speak kindly enough. I hadn't spoken to them in years. Until now. I kept your garden alive, Robert, I said softly, my voice trembling against the rain. The wind whistled through the trees. A single petal broke loose and landed at my feet. I tried to keep them together, too, I whispered, our children, but I failed. They've built their own gardens now, ones where I don't belong. I knelt down, ignoring the cold mud seeping into my dress. They don't hate me. They just forgot what love used to look like. My breath shuddered. Maybe I forgot too. The lane answered for him. I stayed there for a long time. The umbrella slipped from my hand, forgotten. The rain soaked through my hair, my shawl, my skin, but it didn't matter. I felt lighter somehow. The earth was soft beneath my knees. The air smelled like him, like the cologne he used to wear, the faint trace of tobacco, the warmth of home. I miss you, I said finally, every single day. A flash of lightning tore across the sky, followed by thunder, low, distant, almost like a heartbeat. And then I saw it, something glinting near the base of the rosebush. A small tin box, half buried in the soil. My heart stumbled. With shaky hands, I dug it out, mud clinging to my fingers. It was one of Robert's old tobacco tins, rusted, dented, but intact. Inside, there was a folded piece of paper. My breath caught as I opened it. His handwriting, the same uneven scrawl that had once filled the grocery lists, the birthday cards, the notes he left on the fridge. If you're reading this, Maggie, then I didn't get to say goodbye the way I wanted to. But I want you to know something. The roses will always bloom for you. I planted them because I knew one day I wouldn't be here to hold your hand, but they would. They'll remind you that love doesn't end, it just changes shape. Don't let loneliness turn your heart cold. The children may forget, but time will remind them. And when they do, forgive them. Not for them, but for yourself. I love you. Always have, always will. Robert. The ink had bled slightly from the rain, but the words remained. Every line felt like a heartbeat. I pressed the note to my chest and closed my eyes. I forgive them, I whispered, and I forgive myself too. The rain slowed, softening into mist. The sky brightened, a pale glow breaking through the clouds. I felt my body weaken, gently, like a candle burning to its last flicker. My heart was tired, but not sad. I looked once more at the roses, each petal trembling in the wind. They were more than flowers now. They were promises kept, memories alive. "Thank you," I murmured, "for not letting me be forgotten." I sat there until the rain stopped completely. The air was still, the world quiet. Somewhere a bird began to sing. My eyes drifted shut. The sound was soft, like a lullaby. And in that stillness, I felt Robert's arms around me again. No pain, longing, just warmth. When Rachel arrived 2 days later, the call unanswered, her guilt heavier than she could bear, she found me sitting in the garden, the letter still clutched in her hands. My face was peaceful, and beside me the roses had bloomed in full, brighter than ever, swaying gently as though waving farewell. They buried me beside him, under the same tree that had shaded our summers. The children cried that day, not just for death, but for all the years they'd lost to silence. As the rain began again, petals fell softly over the graves, red and white and yellow, mixing with the soil, a garden of memory. And if you stood there long enough, you might have sworn you heard laughter. Two voices, soft and familiar, drifting through the rain. End of story. The Roses, R.O. A hauntingly poetic close to her journey. Solitude, forgiveness, and eternal love, symbolized by the roses that never stopped blooming.